Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Coping. Today, we'll be talking about how self compassion can completely change the way that we deal with hard times.
Yes, if you can remember in our last episode of Coping, we discussed the common misconceptions and myths around self-compassion. And today what we're doing is actually giving you some components of it to begin to practice it, which Kevin and I know can be absolutely life-changing. So we're excited about this.
That's exactly right. And Kristen Neff, who is the researcher that does the self compassion work, says that self compassion really breaks down into three key components. And we're going to walk through them today and unpack what some of that meaning has for us.
So the first component of self-compassion, according to Kristen Neff, is self-kindness versus self-judgment. When you hear this comparison, what comes to mind?
Yeah, so the first thing is that when we're going through something painful, it's really easy to beat ourselves up and to think that being hard on ourselves will push the emotions away and help us to recover faster. The other thing that we believe is that if we just pretend that everything's fine, that we're going to feel fine and that we're going to get over it faster. But actually, self-compassion is the thing that allows us to heal faster. It allows us to be gentle with ourselves and offers us the support and encouragement we need to get through those challenging times.
Yes, and I love Kristen Neff's quote here that self-compassion is being helpful and encouraging to ourselves like a good friend, coach, or mentor would be.
So good. Yeah, she says that it's not about ignoring our struggles or being critical with ourselves. It's actually about showing warmth and patience, like giving ourselves permission to be human. And what's important about the quote that you read, it's doing that for ourselves in the same way that we would do with somebody else, or the way that a coach or a mentor would do with us. I just think that that's such a great approach and reframe of what self-compassion really is.
Yes, and I would say that when we began this work around 7 or 8 years ago, when her book was first released on self-compassion, something that was transformational for me was she was asking, how do we speak to ourselves when something happens, goes wrong, like we fail? Do we automatically start the self-judgment tape? Or do we talk to ourselves like we talk to our children or to our loved ones? And it was very life-changing to me to start becoming aware of how I was speaking to myself in those moments. And this is where we can stop the self-judgment and instead replace it with self-kindness.
And that leads us well into our second part here, which is common humanity versus isolation. What do you think about this one?
Yes, so I think this is related to the conversation about the myths of self-compassion being self-pity, just self-focused. And instead, here's how this whole thing works. If we are able to acknowledge that we are suffering and we're in pain and we're kind to ourselves, like we're treating ourselves well with that, it actually then begins to connect our pain and suffering to the universal suffering that's going on. That brings us out of isolation and actually helps develop more meaningful empathy and connection.
That's so true. And I've seen that true in the grief work that I've done. Grief does a really good job of convincing you that you're alone and that nobody's going to understand what you're going through. So it actually leads to isolation when grief and those symptoms take over. But when we allow self-compassion to be a part of our grief process, and especially when we're hurting, the suffering that we're experiencing can actually be a great connector with other people who have suffered as well. And so I love Kristen Neff's quote here. She says, "When we are self-compassionate, we recognize that our suffering connects us rather than separates us from others."
Yes, exactly. That's a very powerful truth that having self-compassion can actually connect us with all of the suffering
Mm-hmm.
that we see around us. That is amazing and powerful. And that leads us to the third component of self-compassion is mindfulness versus over-identification. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is a really important one because it's about noticing our pain without over exaggerating it or letting it completely take over. And so it's important to recognize when we're hurting and when we have pain, when our internal struggle is present and real and heavy. But mindfulness allows us to stay grounded and helps us to also face the reality without pushing it away. And so we're allowing it to be part of our experience and part of who we are. We don't let it take over the driver's seat or let it define who we are.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like saying this is really hard without getting swept away by the story our minds want to create around it. And here's the quote from Kristen. Mindfulness prevents us from becoming over-identified with difficult thoughts and feelings so we aren't swept away by negative reactivity.
So true. And that's what mindfulness does, doesn't it? We have a tendency to experience and then react. Mindfulness is just the space between our experiences and the way that we respond. And when we allow that mindfulness, we create the space and possibility for self-compassion.
Yes, such an important skill, especially when life feels overwhelming. So today, to summarize everything, we hope you remember to be kind to yourself, to know that you're not alone, and to stay present through all of it by being present to yourself, connecting to your own pain, but being your own best friend.
And so to close our time together today, I want to offer a few mantras from Kristen Neff that might help us in any difficult situation that we might face. What I'd like to do is to read the mantra. I'll leave some time for you to then repeat after each mantra. May I be free from fear. May I treat myself with kindness. May I love myself just as I am. May I know my own goodness. May I give myself the compassion that I need.